Hi, this is Rabbi Rami Goldberg, and welcome to Biblical Money, powered by Israel 365, where we take a deep dive into how people of faith enhance their business by staying true to their biblical principles. We interview leading CEOs, executives, and entrepreneurs to capture their wisdom to help us live our most fulfilled and faithful lives. Please like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date and informed. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Money. I'm your host, Rabbi Rami Goldberg. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we have the pleasure of having Chad Connelly. Chad is the CEO of Faith Wins, My Faith Wins, I believe, and he is responsible for bringing out many of the Christian voters. He told me that before the show that he was in 180 different beds this past year because he was running from place to place on planes constantly. So really amazing, and obviously a successful election for you, for the nation, really for the world. So really amazing. Thank you very much, Chad, for joining us here today.
Well, I'm honored, brother. I really appreciate the connection. And when you and I met, there's no doubt in my mind the Lord put us together and connected us. And we got a heartbeat after the same things. And I'm just honored to be with you, brother.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. So elections and government, we obviously know Deuteronomy is all about building the government. The founding fathers were all about Deuteronomy. That was the most quoted book. But how did you get into making elections and being passionate about it? We always talk about separation of church and state. But you are putting the two very closely together. So how did you get into that originally?
Well, the quick story is I think God just kept tapping me along. I had a passion for the nation. I had a passion for my faith. I had a passion for seeing change. And when I came out of college, I was in the Army. I actually served with some Israelis who were in the tank corps with me in America and did my training. And I started realizing that the Bible speaks to all parts of our lives and that we shouldn't separate, that's economics or that's government or that's family. No, God wants us to be involved in everything. I don't see a place where my spiritual life stops and my political life starts. It all works together. And we see that our character and our faith are built, and we're to engage the world. And so the more I studied and the more I built my own faith, I realized that I had an obligation to be involved. And you may know my story, Rami. My first wife took her own life, left me a single dad with two little boys. That was in 2006. And God worked in my life. I met a girl who was also widowed by suicide. It still gives me goosebumps today. She had two little girls, and her dad, or her husband, first husband, committed suicide almost 2 years to the day before my wife. So we got married. We put a new family together. We came home from our honeymoon with 4 kids under 10, and now we're finally empty nesters. That's 17 and a half years ago. We're one of those people that got to watch God work in our lives. We don't always get that kind of blessing, but we did. But Dana, really, she had the same passions I did. And how do we impact the culture for our kids? And you realize that so much that happens politically impacts us as people of faith. And so I got involved in the political world. I was speaking about school choice, which I think is a huge business issue for not just South Carolina and the United States, but all over the world, is where the kids get their education from. And then, of course, the pro-life movement. And the more I got involved in my faith and I was around pastors, watching that pastors who had influence were not just political data points, they were multipliers. And I started realizing the political side of that. I ran for state party chairman in South Carolina in 2011, got elected. As you know, South Carolina is the first in the South primary state in the presidential sweepstakes every 4 years. And I did a bunch of TV. In fact, I did every political show on television. And a guy named Reince Priebus, most people know that Reince was Trump's first chief of staff, saw me on the show. And I was highlighting how our side ignores people of faith. They assume, they take them for granted. They believe they already got their votes. And I realized there were a bunch of untapped votes out there in faith communities. And so I started working on that. I got to be the first ever national director of faith engagement. I think I told you that's where I met a bunch of your rabbi buddies in Lakewood, New Jersey. And I've done a bunch of meetings with them. After I left GOP Faith, I think I'm the only senior staffer that worked for Priebus that didn't go work in the Trump White House. And I started a 501c3 nonprofit called Faith Wins just to maximize the faith vote in every election. And so from 13 to 17, I went to 42 states. After 17, when I started Faith Wins, I've been to 49 now. I've not done pastor or faith meetings in Hawaii, but pretty much every other state.
I'm sure your wife was waiting for that one, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll go suffer for God there. And so this is our 9th year of Faith Wins, and we work with rabbis and with pastors, with priests, just telling them, hey, look, it's not about political. It's about our spiritual lives. It's and read the word, every book. It's God's people talking to, with, from, or about, or being the leaders themselves. I mean, there's just not a book of the Bible where something political. And I'll tell you, Rami, I think the left has done a good job at talking us out of the arena. And when people of faith go vote their values, like I say, faith wins. If we don't go vote our values, amazingly nonsensical things happen. And you and I were talking before we started. It's like a weight has been lifted. I've been all over. I was in DC for the inaugural. I've been on planes and in hotels and Uber rides since then. It's a new feeling in America, and everybody, everywhere you go, they have an expectation of America's back. I know you guys have to, and I was telling you, I'm bringing some pastors to Israel in April, and they're so excited, and they see a difference in the way the Trump administration in 14 days has treated things like our best allies in the world, Israel, versus how they were treated, how you guys were treated before, with a wishy-washy, on again, off again. We're going to build a $320 million pier, but we're not going to give you the munitions you need. It's amazing. And so working with Faith Wins, I get to work with people of all faiths, and I treat the leadership like they are. That is not data points, but multipliers, because I believe when we get our people just voting values, register all of them and teach them to vote values. And the issue that comes up over and over, people in churches always want to talk about life, marriage, but they want to talk about Israel. They're concerned. They know we have an obligation, and they know the word's clear. Blessed are those who bless Israel. Curse are those who curse Israel. They know those things. And one reason we're taking groups of pastors there every year is to connect that head and that heart knowledge. So that's where Faith Wins came from. It's been a God thing. It's been a blessing. I think I'm doing exactly what he would want me to do, and that is getting people of faith to just vote their values and be engaged in the process.
It's amazing. I mean, all too often the thinking is that like separation of church and state means freedom from religion, not freedom of religion, which I don't think that the founding fathers ever really anticipated that there would be any significant number of agnostics and atheists who are part of the union. I think it was okay. Yes, you could be Jewish, you could be Protestant, you could be Catholic, but it was bring your faith to what you're doing and on a day-to-day basis. And how do you feel like? I think one of the challenges, though, when you are going to talk about freedom of religion, is how much do you see having God be back in kind of like Times Square in the central market, and like, where do you see that? Is it we should all be praying together, or that should still be relegated somewhat to the churches and synagogues?
I tell people all the time. In fact, I taught to my Sunday school class. I quoted from Exodus 18:21 yesterday and this ties in. Moses' father-in-law saw that he was overwhelmed. And you probably know this. You sound like you're a student of history better than me. And the founders quoted this scripture when they developed our representative republic form of democracy. We're not a democracy, we're a republic. It came from scripture. And he said, he knew Moses was overwhelmed. He said, select able men of truth who fear God, hating covetousness, and select them to be rulers of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And the founding fathers in the Constitutional Convention quoted those verses. And it sounds a lot like national, state, county, and city. And because it is. So in your question, we don't have to agree on what time we go to church or which book we're singing out of. We need to link arms about the things that are biblical and are easy to tie in. God made life. He made every life special. Marriage is one man, one woman. Israel matters. Blessed are those who bless Israel. Religious liberty matters. We're to have freedom of conscience. Look at what happened. Their grandmothers, Rami, who went to jail for praying outside of an abortion clinic. Was it 23 of them that Trump pardoned? That's amazing to me. And yet the border wasn't secure and nothing was happening there. So that, I know people who knew some of these kids, young people who were brutally murdered, or some of them raped and murdered by illegal immigrants coming here, and nobody sending them home, nobody holding them accountable. So that's what's got to happen in the public square. And you know how it is. It's the way we teach our kids. It's the way we talk to our friends in the sphere of influence. People watch how you respond to things and how you deal with stuff. And the people that don't have an underlying faith oftentimes will be watching and go, what's different? How do you have this together? And that example works throughout society. When we don't have that kind of faith example, it's an anything goes. I mean, did you ever imagine in your lifetime, did you ever imagine that in America, people, an entire party, in fact, would argue for biological men competing against women in women's sports and demanding that they get to change with full biological facts? They're a dude in front of women, and the women are supposed to, and we're for women supposedly, and the women have got to deal with it. And then the girls who've been injured by competing with males who are bigger, stronger, faster. I never imagined this. And now all of a sudden that stuff got turned on its head a couple of weeks ago. So those examples, if we as people of faith move away from society and the culture, then people with no foundation, no determining boundaries, nature hates a vacuum, that rushes in. I think that's what we've been watching. We've been seeing that. And I believe it's also why the left lost so badly in November, is normal, everyday, God-fearing people raising their kids, going to meetings at their church, going to soccer practice, taking their kids, helping them with homework. They just got fed up, man. They just got fed up and said, I've had enough of this. So I believe we're seeing a resurgence of faith back in the community. And let's face it, the communities need it desperately.
So how do we do this? Let's say educationally. I mean, you have so many disillusioned. We know that the churches and synagogues, many of them are closing. People are moving out of, I'm going to say, organized religion. I don't necessarily believe that everybody has lost their faith overnight, but still, how do we reinvigorate that? And we don't want a top-down government approach. The ideal way obviously comes from family and building up that family structure. So what is it that we can do as a community that we can build that family structure? Isn't it amazing that it happens because denominations, churches, synagogues, some of them have a very liberal interpretation of scripture. And you probably saw that lady, bishop, who preached right at Trump about the disaffected. And yes, we're to take care of the disaffected, but she ignored all the innocent Americans slaughtered by illegal immigrants. And come to find out, she was getting paid by the federal government to reestablish illegals in various parts of the country. How do you do it? I told my Sunday school class yesterday, it starts at home. It's the example you set at home. It's the example you set in your community. It's being involved. I tell pastoral leaders everywhere, have you told your people to register to vote? Have you taught them about these issues and how they impact their lives? Too many times we're just living our life. We're busy. My entire 501c3 nonprofit exists to teach people, educate people. Here's how you can be involved. And I don't believe it's political at all. I believe it's spiritual. I believe that work we do in the communities, I believe that's spiritual. And let's face it, Rami, your church and my church, the synagogues, the parishes, they all started with reaching out to the people, the poor, the infirm, the elderly. And I think in a lot of ways, government has taken that place. I don't know if you've ever read Francis Schaeffer, the
Christian philosopher. Everybody ought to read him. He said, only God belongs on the throne in our lives. And what happens is when people think there's no God, we know only fools think that, and we can read it in scripture, but they do, they really do, then they put self on the throne of their life. And this guy's theory, Francis Schaeffer, he basically said, when self figures out, I don't have the answers. I don't have the answers. They ask the state to solve their problems. And so the state grows bigger and bigger. And you and I both know we always solve problems closer to the source, closer to the problem. That's why even the founders said thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. It's why Moses' father-in-law told him, select able men, men of truth, who fear God, hating covetousness, and make them to be leaders of those groups. And so the closer we get to the problem, the better we solve it. I think we as people of faith, we've escaped that arena in a lot of ways. People get frustrated with it. It's political. It's a dirty word. But look, in America, and this is probably true everywhere, the left doesn't ignore faith groups. And my own side has not really paid the kind of attention to faith organizations like they should. It's one reason I left the RNC and didn't go work in the White House and didn't want to stay at a political campaign. I believe it's best communicated by people like me and you, teaching our friends at that local level, here's what you got to do and here's how you do it.
Yeah, I think on the local level, like with regard to education, is there any hope for the public school system? I read Pete Hegseth's book, Uneducating America. I forget what the name of it, but and he was just talking about how this has been ingrained over the last. He says 100 years. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but okay, let's say it's been the last 40 or 50 years since the 60s kind of alternative. Is there a way to kind of rebuild from within, or is it kind of like Gaza? Gotta mow mow a lot of it down and restart.
I've worked in school choice for over 20 years. I've spoken about it, been to a bunch of states. I'm a big believer that competition works. I made the old joke that if you go to the local restaurant, and this is a horrible example, but it's funny when I'm speaking, I'll say, and you find a toenail in the soup, two things happen. Number one is you don't ever eat there again, and you tell everybody you know. And because of competition, you can go find another place that has better food or service or quality, whatever, right? And in the public education system, they desperately need competition. There's a toenail in the soup, exactly. That creates a word picture for everybody. And people aren't happy. Parents aren't happy. And where you see the community more involved, you see more successful public schools. When you see the community separate and bureaucrats run it, it's a problem. I'm a big believer in an either or, not an and. Not an either or, but an and. We ought to have charter schools, and we ought to have every form of faith school. We ought to offer options, and the dollars ought to follow the kid. When that happens, people actually get to pick what's best for their child. And I believe that's what parents, grandparents, families ought to do. That's the only way I think we'll fix the public schools. Did you see the numbers that came out the last weekend? National Association of Educational Progress, the NAEP numbers. It's worse. It's worse. I'm sure COVID and the lockdowns contributed to that, for our numbers being really shameful, that they found entire districts in some states that had zero children, zero that could read or write at grade level in the 4th and 8th grades. That's stunning. You couldn't teach a single kid how to read or write. And as you know, the left has replaced reading, writing, and arithmetic with climate change and the LGBTQ agenda and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the child being educated. So I think it goes back to the same thing we just mentioned. It's parents, it's people like me and you, people in the community who care, getting involved right where they're at. And if we do that, we start noticing things. I can't tell you, I did a Christian school tour of the State House in South Carolina last week, and I can't tell you the kind of response from parents who put their kids in a school they chose, and they're just astounded. Oh my goodness. And it came from them seeing on Zoom a lot of times what their children were learning or not learning from their teachers in the public school setting. So I think that competition and the free markets open up an awful lot of opportunity. And I believe that's where we got to head, brother.
Yeah. I mean, just for within the Orthodox Jewish community, and I grew up in New Jersey, there's a number of schools. The school system is actually pretty sophisticated, but it's all private schools. Me and all my friends now, our parents made tremendous sacrifices to send us all to these schools. And, and I think on the whole, people did relatively well, both academically, but religiously, which is like one of the major, major areas. Are you seeing now business leaders as well talk faith? Is that something that you've experienced or seen or spoken to? I'm going to say over the last 2 weeks, but in the run up, I think in the run up, everyone was biting their nails, so we were a little nervous. You don't know which way things really were going to go,
It's actually, but it's something I talk about because I'm in churches and synagogues. I did a conservative group in New Jersey, actually. You may have heard of a guy that's running for governor there this time. And there's a group called Project 29-2 after the proverb. And I spoke and there were Israeli leaders, there were Jewish leaders that were in New Jersey from Lakewood. That whole area is a huge area. In concentration, and they become buddies. There were Catholic priests there, and there were business people there. And I talked to the business people about this very thing: is you're being impacted. You're being impacted financially by bad policies, and you're taking this hands-off approach because, oh goodness, that's political. We shouldn't do that. We've got to change that thinking. And I really believe that faith leader, that the priest, the rabbi, the pastor, speaking to people sitting in their pews, Rami, that is the key to me. You probably followed George Barna. He's the faith pollster. He says the number one reason people vote, all demographics, all ethnicities, regions, everything, is somebody they respect tells them it's important. And you know how it is when you vote, when you put a yard sign out, you're vested in a candidate or a cause. All of a sudden, you're a little bit more involved. And so I spoke right at those business leaders. We were in Bedminster. We were at Trump's Bedminster course when I spoke to probably, 250, 300 people there. And this was a lot of my message. It wasn't just a faith wins message. It was a business leader's message. You guys ought to find good causes to fund, because the problem is this government entity's grown so big that it's become a tyranny in a lot of ways. And it's not just costing you money, it's costing us our society. And so you have a vested interest in a bunch of different layers of why you should be involved like never before. Look for ways to impact your culture, your community, and your state. And I was in New Jersey when I gave that message, brother.
Oh, that's great. And because it's so true. I mean, a lot of times businesses, we don't talk politics. We don't want to get into that. And I do think that as a business owner, I'm always okay. You don't know what people are sensitive to, and you do want to be a certain amount sensitive. But at the same token, I do think that some of the direction that we've gone in has become just too much. I mean, I don't know if you saw, like some of the CEOs are still fighting back that we still need DEI. I think Costco is like number one that there, but I don't know how that's good for business ultimately. Meaning, in the end of the day, it's show me the money, right? That's part of what.
My wife and I just had this conversation over the weekend. We're cutting up our Costco card and mailing it in saying, you guys are being stupid, insane. And look, we should all be interested in hiring the best and the brightest. And I'm just a big believer that you don't fix 200-year-old, 400-year-old racism or any other sin, by the way, by creating new sin and new racism and new discrimination. It's a bad idea. And you're right. Some of them are doubling down. But, I think there's a receptivity out there. Everybody knows, and they knew this during the Biden administration, something's not right. It doesn't feel right to have an open border and having these young people who are innocent attacked. It doesn't feel right to have this crime in the cities. A lot of people who complain about one thing will let rampant crime and property damage be done. I don't know if you talk to any owners in a big city like Los Angeles. They're moving out in droves, Rami. They're just what they're doing is they're connecting the dots on the issues. The fire hydrants being empty in the Los Angeles wildfires. I got a bunch of pastor buddies out there, and I asked them, hey, is this real? I'm seeing some celebrities and some typical leftists or left-leaning Holly weirdos speaking out against the policies that Newsom had on water and environmental cleanup of the forest. And people say it's real. They say that they're seeing people leave and they're disgusted. So when people start connecting dots, it doesn't become political. It becomes issue oriented. And we use voter guides to point that out to people. Take a look at these issues and where you stand in your faith and where you stand. I hate to say this, Trump's common sense statement is exactly right. This is common sense. If people are stealing things and the city council comes in and puts a motion that as long as it's under $1,000, they can steal it and we won't press charges. What? That's insane. We're not going to fill this reservoir because of this fish somewhere along the stream. That's nuts. And it costs a lot of people their property and homes. So I think one thing we've got to do, people like me and you who are in this sphere, we got to help people connect those dots and see this is not political. These are common sense, real life issues. Now, yes, they've been politicized. But just because they've been politicized, it doesn't remove my responsibility to be honest and tell the truth and tell people what's effective and what's not. We're seeing it in real time.
Yeah. So are there, kind of looking to the future, there's obviously a lot of optimism, but what are you most nervous about in terms of it could be Trump, it could be just, in terms of, but what are you kind of most nervous about in terms of going into the next 4 years?
Yeah, I think that what I'm nervous about is I just was back reading in our Old Testament in your book, King Josiah. King Josiah was a godly man who did everything right. He destroyed the high place of worship, the Baal worship. He went back to a godly approach. He went back and read the word. He had his scribes read the word, but the next generation, Rami, returned and forgot it. I think what I'm most concerned is, and Dr. Falwell had this quote, he said in the 1990s, our problem as people of faith, we win, we quit, we lose, we quit. Let's quit quitting. My concern is we would think, oh, it's done now. It's good. Listen, I think the problems that America, Israel, the world face are generational problems. There's a birth rate crisis. There's certainly an illegal immigrant crisis that's going on that is going to take time to fix. There's a wrong approach. There's a globalist crisis. There's an anti-Israel sentiment among a lot of these globalists that don't think you have the right to exist. So these are generational problems that are going to take more than 4 years to solve. So what I'm concerned about is the people that are around me and you thinking, take a big sigh of relief and go, it's over. And so one thing I'm telling my folks is the work has just started. And so one thing that I think we found is it takes a lot of energy to ramp up and get started. And so I'm trying to tell all our pastor leaders, stay engaged. Let's find issues that matter. Israel's one of them. It's why I'm taking 20 pastors and their wives to the Holy Land in 7-8 weeks from now. We're going to be there. And because I think people need to understand this is an ongoing issue. I'm glad that, I don't know if you saw this, but the owner of the Patriots is buying a Super Bowl ad to point out the anti-Semitism, the hate. I mean, that's what's got to happen. We have to go back and educate people. I think too many on our side have been willing to stand off, and it's because they don't want to be attacked. I was out doing meetings this past fall, and a bunch of lefty publications came and followed us and called us all kind of names. But they didn't mind when LGBT flags were flying from churches or BLM flags. And I asked some of the writers, you're concerned because I'm teaching people in church God's role in American history. And did you spend as much time when they hung flags like LGBTQ anti-biblical flags or BLM flags from churches. And I had one of them actually tell me that's not the topic of our article. Well, sure it's not. But I think too many people on our side, as soon as they get hit, they put their head down. And I think we got to quit. Falwell said, let's quit. And anybody that knows me know I'm not a quitter, so I'm not going anywhere. I'm telling our folks we are just getting started.
It's much harder to build up than it is to destroy. I mean, look at California. That we're just within a couple of days, not even days, a couple of hours. Half the city goes down. That took years and years to build up, and that's something where you could see that destruction, but people don't notice the progress because every day you get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. But when things fall apart, they go like that. So it is something that you're absolutely right. It's something where we need to continue to build, and building children, building a society, building faith is something that's ups and downs and struggles. So it's certainly
it's not a halfway process either. I mean, look at y'all's situation with Gaza. That cannot remain. Nothing that looks like Hamas can remain intact. It can't, because good people don't if their neighbor's building a catapult and the only people on the block, you don't let them finish the catapult. You don't let them finish sharpening the knives if they're going to use it against you. And that's what those people have done to you guys for decades. You gave them free elections. What they do? They elect a bunch of thugs who are going to run things and don't even think Israel has a right to exist. And so we now have an administration who's going to tell the truth about it, who's got your back. Look, I want the hostages home. I've been praying for those hostages for many, many, many months, over a year now. And it hurts my heart to think what some of those parents have endured for, 500 days. It's just unconscionable. It just aches your heart. And so people like Hamas and Hezbollah cannot exist. And we got a chance under a Trump administration backing up Israel that we can actually eliminate that. Now, there'll be another evil pop up. You and I understand that's always
whack-a-mole.
There. Yes, but
Right.
whack-a-mole, we ought to whack them so much they don't come back. That's for sure. What they did on October 7th cannot be allowed to happen. And these apologists in America at colleges and institutions and marching around, you've probably seen they're blocking freeways in Los Angeles. Send them home. You want to fly that flag you supposedly escaped from, we're going to get you back there right away. And we got a president and an administration committed to doing that. I'm happy about that.
Yeah. And it's something where it's not just, it's obviously we're fighting the fight and we feel like we're on the front lines of world civilization over here. And it's something where the good people of the world need to all continue to stand up and continue doing the great work. So I'd like to just end off with a blessing that God should continue to bless you with amazing strength and ability to, keep going and just getting started with this work. And you should always have that strength and that wisdom to know the right thing to do and to lead people in the way that you're doing. So God bless.
Thank you, my brother. God bless. I'll see you in a few weeks, Rami.
Okay. All the best.
Thanks,
Thank
buddy.
you.